Thanks Justin, and thanks Jana, who invited me about a year and a half ago to come and talk about the Anthropocene, and then I hid for about a year and a half, and I'm finally going to deliver this paper, hopefully to rave reviews. So actually this paper is based on an article. I'm going to implicate you in this, Pete. An article that Pete and I put together when we were both on study leave, which has got the fancy title Anthropocene, Assessing the Potential of the Anthropocene to Reinvigorate Environmental Politics. And it's part of a wider series of projects Pete and I and others have done together on depoliticisation and the post-political condition. So it's very much premised in that debate. Anyway, we sent the paper off, and it's currently with Political Geography. Well, they've written back to me and say revise and resubmit. That's what they say. When they say revise and resubmit, what they mean is extend the paper in various ways while simultaneously cutting the word count, which is like an impossibility. So that's what I'm currently doing at the moment. And when I say I'm currently doing at the moment, I mean I'm kind of trying to avoid at all costs at the moment because it terrifies me. It's one of those pieces of work that when you're doing your day-to-day mundane tasks of email, you can ignore it, but then in the middle of the night, you get edit this, because you get this feeling at the back of your head going, you haven't fucking done the Anthropocene revisions, you haven't done it, and it scares you and it terrifies you. So that's the approach, that's where I'm at with this. So that's kind of my roundabout way of saying thank you to Justin and Jana for inviting me to come and talk about the paper today, to get me to face my demons with it, and also to give me the opportunity to maybe to hear some of your comments on this paper, because it's undergoing a revise and resubmit as we speak, hopefully soon. It'd be nice to hear what you've got to say about the paper as well, and I think it'll be really helpful. So anyway, to get to the point, what I plan to talk about today is the consequences of labelling our current geological era, the current epoch we're in, as the Anthropocene. Primarily then, this paper amounts to an argument with a number of scholars, but primarily a scholar called Eric Swingerdow, who argues that this labelling of this era, sort of this labelling, rebranding process of the geological era, offers an opportunity for us to repoliticise environmental politics, to invest it in sort of some political debate. And it's a logic I'm going to talk you through shortly. But firstly, I want to forget about the Anthropocene terminology for the moment, because I think it's worth kind of outlining the problem on which both myself and Swingerdow actually agree. Namely that the environment broadly, and climate change in particular, are examples par excellence of the post-political condition. And as such, environmental issues, or as a result, environmental issues have been depoliticised. So what's the post-political condition? I have a fetish for Google images. None of these are copyrighted, these images, but I like putting them. It's where everybody agrees. A post-political condition is where everybody agrees, kind of thing. So as such, sort of an interesting place to start then would be to discuss what we broadly mean when we talk about post-politics, when we talk about depoliticisation. And apologies if this is obvious to the people in here, but I'm going to go through it anyway. So post-politics is a term that's often attributed to Chantal Mouffe and others like Zizek. And as you likely know, post-politics refers to a political situation whereby conflict and dissensus are superseded by management, administration and consensus in decision-making arenas. And as a result then, in a post-political climate, decisions and disagreements get limited to debates over sort of techno-managerial and organisational minutiae, sort of policy items, rather than sort of conflicts premised on bigger political cleavages, so conflicts premised on opposing diverse ideological and political positions. In other words, it's where everybody at the table agrees, they're broadly in agreement at a kind of political, ideological level, And so discussions then get reduced to what Swingerdow would refer to as technical, managerial and consensual administration. It's those meetings you go to where everybody kind of agrees, but you talk about the little things in a really boring way, you know, that kind of thing. As such, the post-political condition then operates in such a way as to maintain the status quo, because agonistic pluralism or dialogue, so wider debates and dissensus, are discouraged or absent in favour of this kind of, we all agree, this consensus. In addition, the status quo is perpetuated because alternative political and socio-economic futures are foreclosed. You can't speak about them in this environment. And that's because these more profound political cleavages are eradicated, and this foreclosure of alternative visions is often considered to be part of the process referred to as depoliticisation. So how does that link to the environment? What's green about the post-political? So by way of extension then to the works of Muth and Zizek on post-politics, a number of scholars such as Swingerdow and actually Zizek himself have utilised the concepts of post-politics and depoliticisation and honed in to focus on one policy area in particular, namely the environment. For instance, Swingerdow argues that environmental and climate concerns, rather than inciting what he calls politics proper, this kind of dissensus politics where there's this big debate about how we should imagine our socio-ecological future, so rather than inciting what he calls this politics proper of the environment, environmental politics actually is depoliticised in that discourses of environmental degradation demand a call for consensus where the scope of debate is severely limited to a discussion of technological and managerial decisions that do nothing to transform the contours of the existing state of the situation, so that nothing really has to change. So to unpack that, it's kind of dense, but to unpack that, two things are happening simultaneously. First, environmental and climatic change discourses, because they're presented using discourses of fear and danger, because they're presented as kind of these security risks that everybody faces, they become typified by consensus, as the consequences of climate change are imagined to be so dire and urgent that there's no room or indeed time to have a chat about them. Yeah, it's like you better act now, and so there's no time to like debate it or open it up to democracy. It's presented then kind of as a no-brainer. You know, people, of course we need to manage our environment. At the same time, responses to this dire problem of environmental degradation and climate change are reduced to a set of solutions that don't actually do anything to challenge the status quo, that don't do anything to challenge the socio-economic and political landscape we find ourselves in. So they're saying act now, but only tweak at the edges. Yeah? Therefore, solutions are found in kind of managerial and technological fixes, typified by the processes of eco-modernization. Eco-modernization is like, you know, the environmental perspective where you think, oh, if I buy an electric car, that will work to save the environment. You don't have to really do anything profound to change your lifestyle. You just need to have a technological fix here or there. Or market forces can be brought in to help save the environment. Indeed, Nemanis contends that ecological modernisation has been the victorious discourse over alternative forms of socio-ecological organisation. And that's because efforts to ameliorate environmental degradation through eco-modernisation are expediently constructed as running concurrently with the neoliberal principles of the market and technological innovation. In other words, the support for eco-modernisation is unsurprising within and contributory to the post-political condition, as it works in tandem with neoliberal capitalism and thereby sustains the status quo. Overall, then, the fear and danger used to propel these issues into the public imaginary, and the reduction of climate change and the environmental problematique to something like CO2 emissions, which after all can be traded, marketized, packaged. This presents these issues in a depoliticised way, where only one solution is valid, and this solution demands a techno-managerial and market-based response, usually, like I've implied, in the form of tradable carbon. Overall, then, authors like Swingadao and Nemanis offer a convincing account as to the restriction of the political in relation to environmental and climate change issues. However, these authors, in recognising this need to repoliticise the environment, have situated the potential promise for repoliticisation with the kind of rebranding of this geological era as the Anthropocene. As Swingadao contends, the Anthropocenic inauguration of a socio-physical historical nature forces a profound reconsideration and rescripting of the matter of nature in political terms. So they see the Anthropocene as you know, has this opportunity for us to think about, or to allow us to think about how we relate to nature in better ways. So what's the Anthropocene? It sounds terrifying. The Anthropocene, it is terrifying. In May 2000, the Nobel Prize winner Paul Crutzen and his colleague Eugene Stormer launched the term the Anthropocene in their imaginatively entitled article, The Anthropocene. The Anthropocene then refers to the contemporary geological era, whereby humans are considered to have altered the ecosystem fundamentally, and constituting the human species then as a significant geological force or agent. The Anthropocene then, according to these geologists, as a kind of new geological epoch, began during the mid-18th century and is primarily marked by the use of fossil fuels to sort of energise the Industrial Revolution. So it begins with sort of intensive use of fossil fuels based on the demands of the Industrial Revolution. Since then, humanity's role as a geological force has intensified and continues to intensify during the post-war period. And this is a phenomenon that Anthropocene proponents call the Great Acceleration. So post-1950s, we see a great acceleration of humanity's role as a geological force. So things get worse environmentally. And the most recent phase of the Anthropocene, phase 3 of the Anthropocene, where we are now, it relates to humans in the 21st century, realising their dramatic geological impact on ecosystems, but simultaneously it's characterised by a democratisation of the Great Acceleration. So it's sort of environmentally unfriendly behaviours become more democratised as other economies, emerging economies, increase their use of fossil fuels and their production of biochemical nasties. So with regard to the former point, it's argued that whilst the Great Acceleration becomes further accelerated, humanity's growing awareness marks the first attempt to build global governance systems to manage humanity's relationship with the Earth system. In other words, the third phase of the Anthropocene is identifiable because there's a further acceleration of the human species' impact on the planet. There's an acknowledgement of the responsibility of the human species in changing the climate and producing environmental ills. And there's the nascent attempts by the human species to try and manage these environmental impacts. It's all about the human species, and there's a whole paper that I'm not giving today about the anthropocentrism of the Anthropocene, which is unsurprising given the name. But it does point to kind of human narcissism, how central we are to these discourses. But that's an aside. Currently then, where we're at now is phase 3 of the Anthropocene, where humans, recognising the error of their ways, continue to develop globally, yet seek these techno-managerial solutions to ease these environmental ills they've created. So the advert for Land Rover, it's random. really, but it's to sort of show nature and culture. Nature's winning there, which doesn't happen in the Anthropocene, but I'll get to that. So as I've noted then, this logic of the Anthropocene, the idea that we've reached this new geological age where humans are suitably implicated, has for many commentators who bemoaned the depoliticisation of environmental issues, it's allowed those commentators to seize on this rebranding, to seize on this geological naming exercise as an opportunity to reinvigorate environmental politics. And this is largely because they recognise the Anthropocene as a concept which blurs the divide or dichotomy between nature and culture, between humans and nature, which has arguably been long been considered the kind of root of environmental ills, because the separation between humans and nature has justified human domination over nature or human exploitation over nature because of the stratification of the binary. So the Anthropocene, they argue, blurs this binary, and they see that as a good thing. So the proponents of the Anthropocene tend to see promise in the term because it highlights human culpability for environmental degradation and blurs the human-nature distinction. The recognition of this new geological era, where humans are implicated and responsibilised for ecosystems changes, has the potential to create a paradigm shift for the better, as it offers the opportunity for humans to reflect on or recalibrate their relationship with nature. So blurring the boundaries between the two traditionally diametrically opposed arenas or categories works in the service of a better social and natural relationship. In other words, as the realisation dawns that humanity is a substantive natural force, the boundary between nature and culture becomes eroded, and without a clear concept of nature, human mastery over nature is undermined, but also the object of traditional environmentalism. Environmentalists go out to save nature. Now the object of their environmentalism also becomes undermined, and they argue that this paves the way for a more nuanced, reflexive and effective environmental politics. Relatedly then, Anthropocene proponents also argue that the Anthropocene logic actually offers a sense of hope in environmental politics debates. They argue that the Anthropocene injects positivity into how we can imagine our future, where humans can effectively collaborate with non-humans and technology to produce a better and safer planet for us all. Largely, this amounts to an argument whereby humans and human systems are considered to, so things like the economy and technology are considered to no longer have to be recognised as distinct from nature or at odds with nature, and instead should be regarded in the Anthropocene formulation as mutually supportive. As such, it follows that the Anthropocene logic reinvigorates politics proper, as new ways of being, new futures can be imagined, increasing the scope to deliberate on what those futures might look like and repoliticising the debate. So we've got some hope. It's not all just going to end in Armageddon, environmental Armageddon. We've got some hope. We can collaborate with nature. Technology is going to save us. It's all great. It opens up those debates as those futures open up. However, in contrast, Pete and I don't agree with that. In contrast, we contend that any hope, we don't agree with anything that's hopeful, that's the truth. We contend that any hope invested in the Anthropocene as a discursive space to reinvigorate proper environmental politics is seriously misplaced. This is because the Anthropocene is actually a product of or continuation of environmental post-politics. In other words, it's already on the dark side. It's already appropriated by the forces of evil and is heavily implicated in sort of the processes of depoliticising the environment and ecology. And indeed, there are a number of reasons as to why the discourses of the Anthropocene operate in a depoliticising way. three of which I'm going to sort of introduce today. So firstly, there's the representation of the Anthropocene as a reality that we're in now, marked by contradictory discourses of danger and detachment. I'm going to go through each of these in turn. Secondly, there's this kind of single trajectory thinking that goes alongside the Anthropocene. And thirdly, there's the species thinking that accompanies the Anthropocene. And one for catchy short titles. Okay, so the representation of the Anthropocene as a reality marked by the contradictory discourses of danger and detachment. So the depoliticizing effects of the Anthropocene are reinforced through the construction of the geological phenomena as a contemporary and inevitable reality. In other words, the Anthropocene is constructed as a done deal, as the way it is. It's kind of a descriptive rather than aspirational. It's not what we go into, it's how things are now, which in itself narrows the discourses around the ways it can be imagined and how it can be reimagined. It just is. So this kind of inevitable reality that is the Anthropocene is presented in two contradictory ways, as either posing an imminent threat to humanity, so a bit like the discourses we looked at when we looked at the environment more broadly, that use danger and fear as a way to kind of stifle debate. But it's also conversely presented in a detached or de-dramatized way, as a collection of facts or truths that need to be addressed. So with regards to the dramatic presentation of the Anthropocene proponent Frank Bierman, who happens to be the chair of the Earth System Governance Project, that sounds, all of it's terrifying, the Earth Systems Governance Project, and whose work has actually been influential in shaping the debates on sustainable development kind of internationally, at an international governance level. He argues, him and his colleagues, that the Anthropocene is a reality that urgently calls for better stewardship of the planet. Moreover, the mechanisms in which this stewardship should occur, according to Bierman's long list of recommendations that he presented at the 2012 Rio+20 conference on sustainable development, so the last big conference on sustainable development. What he suggests that we do is strengthen create more UN governance agencies. The best way to respond to an imminent threat, we're all going to die, is to create more agencies and governance agencies within the UN. So here the Anthropocene, constructed as an immediate reality, is utilised to strengthen the managerial and technocratic institutional architectures that perpetuate the post-political condition. In addition, Bierman's representation of the Anthropocene is so grave that there is a call for urgent human action, allowing little room or time for agonistic dialogue or debate, for proper politics, as it were. Because after all, the demand for urgent change is upon us. It's the reality we're in at the moment. And this is perhaps more worrying given that the work undertaken by scholars like Bierman and his colleagues commonly and explicitly feeds into policy agendas and governance forums, such as the 2012 Rio+20 conference. Now conversely, yet simultaneously, whilst Bierman and his colleagues' work on the Anthropocene has the effect of depoliticising environmental issues through the utilisation of fear and danger narratives, there exists a contradictory set of discourses that de-dramatise and dilute the danger and fear associated with environmental degradation. Now, this set of discourses also works to depoliticise environmental matters in the context of the Anthropocene. And a good example of this de-dramatisation of environmental issues can be found in the film that opened the 2012 Rio+20 Earth Summit. And this film is called, I'm going to show you this film, it's only 3 minutes long. This is how they opened the conference. And it's called Welcome to the Anthropocene.
This is the story of how one species changed a planet. The latest chapter of our story begins in England 250 years ago. Fueled by coal, then oil, several brilliant inventions appeared. They ignited the Industrial Revolution, which spread like wildfire through Europe, North America, Japan, then elsewhere. The great railways, then cars and highways, connected people across the globe. Medical discoveries saved millions of lives. New artificial fertilizers meant we could feed more people. Population rose rapidly. But this was nothing compared with what was to come. The 1950s marked the beginning of the Great Acceleration. Globalization, marketing, tourism, and huge investments helped fuel enormous growth. People swarmed to cities, which became even more powerful engines of creativity. In a single lifetime, the well-being of millions has improved beyond measure. Health, wealth, security, longevity, never have so many had so much. Yet 1 billion are malnourished. In a single lifetime, we have grown into a phenomenal global force. We move more sediment and rock annually than all natural processes, such as erosion and rivers. We manage 3/4 of all land outside the ice sheets. Greenhouse gas levels this high have not been seen for over 1 million years. Temperatures are increasing. We have made a hole in the ozone layer. We are losing biodiversity. Many of the world's deltas are sinking due to damming, mining, and other causes. Sea level is rising. Ocean acidification is a real threat. We are altering Earth's natural cycles. We have entered the Anthropocene, a new geological epoch dominated by humanity. This relentless pressure on our planet risks unprecedented destabilization. But our creativity, energy, and industry offer hope. We have shaped our past. We are shaping our present. We can shape our future. You and I are part of this story. We are the first generation to realize this new responsibility. As the population grows to 9 billion, we must find a safe operating space for humanity, for the sake of future generations. Welcome to the Anthropocene.
Chilling, isn't it? Chilling. So, although there are risk narratives in there, in this short film, that kind of disembodied narrator also uses a selection of quite benign language that you wouldn't historically put with the environmental movement. She talks about changing, shaping, and altering the earth and the planet, rather than sort of the language of damaging, degrading, and destroying ecosystems. So it's put in a very matter-of-fact kind of way, a very detached way. In fact, often people that talk about the Anthropocene say one of the indicators that we're in the Anthropocene is we're going to cause the next mass extinction. Just in passing, that's how they say it. Like, loads of animals are going to die, like in the Ice Age, but they just sort of say it. Well, that shows that we're in the Anthropocene. Almost like it's better to prove the point we're in the Anthropocene than to try and buck the trend of, all the poor little animals dying. Anyway, so it's kind of put in this matter-of-fact way. As such, what we contend here is that whilst discourses of danger and fear can create the conditions for a type of political asphyxiation, whereby the construction of the need to act immediately stifles debate, even suspends democracy, similarly, the absence of a dramatic narrative breeds complacency and does little to encourage political debate. If we're kind of some people who are technologically minded are going to creatively deal with the environmental problem, and therefore, what's there really to talk about? It's going to be okay. So underplaying then the severity of environmental degradation and climate change can work to depoliticize as much as overplaying insecurity, with the former creating kind of political apathy and the latter failing to create the conditions for effective debate. Now the second thing I wanted to talk about in sort of this depoliticizing trend of Anthropocene logic is single trajectory thinking. So the Anthropocenic logic, where the Anthropocene and its consequences are constructed as a de-dramatized reality that is already upon us, promotes another technique of depoliticization, namely single trajectory thinking. Single trajectory thinking then refers to the ways in which policy regarding environmental and climatic degradation is formulated so that alternative visions of socio-ecological and economic relations are rendered invisible, and the only solutions on the table, as it were, are all too expediently linked to kind of the status quo. So they do little to disrupt existing political and economic relations. And this can be demonstrated through looking at the Anthropocene in a similar way to the solutions that were constructed to combat climatic and environmental degradation that I noted earlier. And it's been tied to the paradigm then of eco-modernization, whereby technologies and market forces are considered the best or only approaches appropriate for accommodating human existence. And when they talk about human existence, it could be read as human enterprise. So the Anthropocene then works to intensify and further justify this single trajectory thinking, where eco-modernization, techno-fixes and marketization are presented as the only solutions capable of addressing environmental issues. They're the only practical solutions we have. For example, supporters of the Anthropocene, like Will Stephan, emphasise the promise of complex technological planetary monitoring systems that would assist in predicting changes in the ecosystem so that policymakers can respond in time. So the debate fails then to move beyond a discussion of how best to apply fails to move beyond a discussion of how best to sort of apply these new technologies to regulate Earth systems. And this diluted politics, symptomatic of the post-political condition, then fails to disrupt and actually reinforces the contemporary political, economic and ecological landscape, offering a future characterised by more of the same. So how you fix the environmental problem is offer more of the same, rather than a multiplicity of socio-ecological and politico-economic potentialities. So it offers one solution, and it's a market-based solution. The final one, I think this is maybe the most interesting sort of depoliticizing strategy that you can see, or technique that you can see within the Anthropocene logic, is that of species thinking. So the final aspect of depoliticization I want to consider today is that which results from thinking of humanity as a species, a logic that's crucial to the Anthropocene rationality. So earlier I outlined the mainstream definition of the Anthropocene as being the name given to the current geological era whereby human activity is considered to have substantively altered the planet in such profound ways that it is now viable and accurate to think of the human species as a geological force. And in order to support that contention, this idea that humans constitute a geological force, this common understanding of the Anthropocene requires one to imagine humanity as a species rather than as a collection of groupings or as a series of individuals. In other words, categorizing humans into various socio-economic or other groupings or individualizing them undermines the Anthropocene thesis, as it exposes that humans inhabiting differential identity, spatial and temporal spaces are not equally culpable for or vulnerable to the environmental consequences attributed to the Anthropocene. So if you say that there's lots of different groups of people and we're not like all in this together, what that does is it exposes that some people are more guilty or culpable of creating environmental damage, whether they be people now in different geographical areas or people from the past. They're more culpable than others. And so if you just say it's every human, then you don't kind of differentiate blame. So for the Anthropocene logic to hold up, then humanity must be considered in species terms. Otherwise, the anthropos prefix, which locates ecosystem alteration to be produced by all humans rather than some humans, no longer makes sense and is revealed as a misnomer. Now, this universalization of humanity is bad in itself. This is problematic and a number of scholars have said things like, well, it helps, the Anthropocene logic helps polar bears know who's culpable for the environmental degradation, but doesn't help like humans know the other humans that have done, who are more responsible than others. But it's interesting in terms of depoliticization as well. So the universalization of humanity contributes to the processes of depoliticization and the post-political character of environmental decision-making, because in this kind of species thinking, differences between political subjects become invisibilized. And it's these differences and societal tensions that work as a motor or a catalyst for proper politics. They encourage agonistic debate. As Swingerdow himself notes, it is precisely this constitutive split of the people, the recognition of radically differentiated and often opposing social, political, or ecological desires that calls the proper democratic into being. So this constitutive split of the people is eradicated within the discursive matrix of the Anthropocene, because Anthropocene logic constructs humanity as a whole, as a species that's universally a geological agent. So this species thinking then universalizes humanity and renders intraspecies inequalities, indeed the very inequalities crucial to fueling political debate, it renders them invisible. That was one of my favourites, that's why I've left it to the end. It's good, isn't it? Welcome to the fabulous Anthropocene era. Overall then, we contend that the Anthropocene narrative intensifies the trend for depoliticizing climatic and environmental issues. And to demonstrate this, we have identified three key and interrelated ways in which the Anthropocene logic intensifies depoliticization and contributes to the post-political condition. First, the representation of the Anthropocene as a reality marked by the contradictory discourses of danger and detachment works to depoliticize environmental and climate politics, because the Anthropocene is constructed as an inevitable reality whereby environmental degradation is presented as either so grave proper politics has to be suspended in lieu of effective and efficient decision making, or in such a matter-of-fact and detached way that the passion and motivation to engage in proper politics is stifled. Second, we identified the single trajectory thinking that accompanies the Anthropocene as depoliticizing, in that alternative socio-economic and political futures are silenced or marginalized, and therefore the scope for debate is narrowed and reduced to sort of eco-modernizing solutions. And finally, we identified the species thinking that accompanies the Anthropocene as depoliticizing, in that it universalizes humanity and subsequently obscures the divisions between individuals and groups that are likely to fuel agnostic debate. There's a more upbeat version of this paper, but I didn't give it. So that's me, that's finished. Any questions? Thank you.
Because there was a lot written around sustainable development in terms of how it is conceived and how it is kind of being led down the kind of neoliberal path of technological fixes and market mechanisms and eco-modernization, whereas in its kind of original form, it was more like a broader concept, an idea that, you know, there could be different futures, there could be alternative values. There are debates about, you know, the steady state economy and stuff like that, but none of this politically has been very successful. Whereas if you read the literature around it, you'll see that there is an alternative. And I think it sounds like with the Anthropocene, it's like, again, like a kind of concept that's been hijacked. It's like, because it was originally conceived of as, look how much impact we're having, so much that actually we could be talking about a new geological era. And this argument was made by geologists originally, and they weren't maybe they were trying to, kind of grab the attention and stuff like that. But in terms of then kind of being taken through the political process and now being kind of used as a way to kind of again reinforce practices already stated. I don't know if you got any of that, if you feel like there is a parallel there in terms of how concepts are kind of politicized in particular, or kind of taken in particular trajectories through mainstreaming.
I think it's a continuation of the sort of sustainable development debate, and it's interesting that it's used to launch. So 2000, it sort of in 2012 when they had Rio +20, that was met with quite a lackluster response. It's like, sustainable development's kind of a dying term. It's not as popular as it used to be, but they started off talking about the Anthropocene instead. So it feels like they're trying to reinvest in that term, but it's appropriated in similar ways. I think there was more up for grabs in '92 when there was a discussion on sustainable development, and it's a shame that it's a bit like Eskimos and snow, isn't it? There's 40 definitions of snow, and sustainable development amongst ecologists at the time had loads and loads of definitions, and really good and deep green ones as well, and they get filtered out through this mainstreaming process. I don't think it's been as complicated with the Anthropocene. I think it's been and I think that's part of the problem, is it's been appropriated so easily and so quickly, along that same trajectory as sustainable development went, the marketisation. So it does just become more of the same, eco-modernisation and those sorts of things. And interestingly, I delivered, this year I did a session with my environmental politics group on the Anthropocene, and I hadn't done a whole session with them before. I didn't talk about depoliticisation, I just told them what the Anthropocene was. And I asked them, were there any problems with the Anthropocene logic? And one of the students said, one of the problems is that whilst geologists might think, this is a good way to get people on the environmental bandwagon, all it is more elitist nonsense that made Brexit happen. The fact we talk about the Anthropocene actually takes it away from the public and makes it something very academic and makes it something very elitist. And so what they're saying is it's not, this isn't going to reach the people. So whilst geologists thought it's like, this is going to be so popular, the Anthropocene, everybody's going to jump on this. Nobody really, if you have to really think about what the anthropos is first, the root of the term. So in that sense, they kind of highlighted a sort of factor of depoliticisation that I hadn't thought of before, because it doesn't reach people, this logic. Maybe sustainable development was better.
Yeah, funny that, because I was actually made a note about this, like the idea that this brings awareness to people, awareness of what we're doing. And it's like, if you go around the streets and you ask people, what is the Anthropocene? They'll be like, I don't know. If you ask them what is sustainable development, they might have a vague.
They might have a better idea.
Yeah, a better idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of... It's interesting because the stratigraphers who kind of come up with it, they go, well, it's not a real geological term because it undermines their discipline, because there isn't enough evidence to say the Anthropocene exists. So they're like saying, well, we can't use it scientifically. It's really for popular culture. I don't know what they think we do in popular culture, but nobody... Really? Oh, I better stop, I don't know, driving my diesel car because it's the Anthropocene. Welcome to it. Yeah, it is a continuation, and I think actually it's a really good point, because some of that literature on sustainable development I haven't accessed, the oxymoron stuff, this idea of sustainable development being irreconcilable, and it would link quite well to this paper, so I might put it in, because I've got to extend it whilst cutting paper.
I was thinking that there are parallels between discourses around the Anthropocene and those around the third industrial revolution. So, for example, this year in January at the Davos conference, a lot of the CEO of Alibaba and some other moguls looked as if they are socialists, because they were saying they really they appropriated left-wing arguments in a way, saying, oh, we want universal basic income, and we are using technology now, so we're losing jobs. So they just look as if they are the good doers. And I think it's the same with the Anthropocene, the capitalists, and people can present themselves as the good doers, as kind of, oh, you should agree with us because we found solutions and we've done the research and we are concerned with the earth, but actually
It's just a bit more greenwashing to sort of hide the sort of I don't know, more malevolent forces. I think it might well be a bit like that, those that jump on that bandwagon, or we're doing something a bit like corporate social responsibility and all those sorts of arguments. But I do agree with you. I think it makes them look like they're doing something, but really it's just business as usual. It's really just, and it can even be marketable, so it makes them more marketable. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so there was without mentioning any names, there was a debate on Facebook where one person's member.
Oh no, mention names. No, don't mention names. I'm only joking.
I can later.
I'm going to write that. Pulsis.
Alleged Pulsis member.
Okay.
Was describing their spat over turning a machine off because the machine left on and stopped lots of electricity. So the irony there was the person doing this, the person accessing the Facebook, people accessing the Facebook, press like and comment, using smartphones, and the rise of smartphones and wireless technology obviously gobbles up vast amounts of electricity. That's a major problem that we've seen. Not driving a car, a diesel car, now, whatever. It is a major strain on resources. And also, of course, there are problems with precious metals being extracted. And political problems with that too. But then if you try and say to people, here's what the problem is, in purely cognitive terms, you need less stuff and to use less stuff and to not use such new stuff, you won't get very far. Make life seem less comfortable, also life seem elitist, and so on. So I guess to change things in an agonistic way is not just to have a debate that entails a more democratic approach to defining and solving the problem. It's something that can come up with a new imaginative vision too. So you can't face these arguments that capture people with cognitive arguments. So to overcome the elitism and to move it beyond sort of dry pseudo-technocratic arguments has to be some sort of emotionally grabbing
I agree with you, and in more upbeat paper there's a sort of little bit of a vision at the end of what that might look like, because I think it's to do with attitudinal changes that are based at an emotional level rather than based in sort of techno fixes. I think what the environmental movement, I think I agree that the environmental movement en masse is kind of guilty of creating a hope vacuum. So what they did was get going, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. And everybody's like, oh, if I'm going to die, I don't really want to engage with you. What's the point in doing anything? So it always seemed like you were being told off all the time. And you're not going to get that much support from the public if you're being told off all the time. So there's this kind of hope vacuum created, and then what the Anthropocene does, if you read it in that positive way, is it says, well, there's some hope here, we can think about things, we can use our creativity, our technology to solve these problems, and that seems like an easy solution, that's not disruptive to your life, and there's a bit of hope at the end of the tunnel, and it's all good. However, ultimately I don't think that is any good, and I think there's a lot of problems, and that's just going to perpetuate it's not a big enough change to prevent climate change and environmental degradation. I suppose then instead I think there has to be a shift in how we think about our relationship with the natural world, and I think you do need to erode the culture-nature divide, and I think queer ecology offers some hope. So you think about kinship differently, not just based on who you marry and your children, because usually we save the environment for our children and our children's children. It's very, very selfish, in fact, if you think about it. I'm only saving the environment to make sure my gene pool has something to spread into, but if we actually took away from those kind of ideas where we're not just saving the environment for our children and our children's children, and we love nature a bit more expansively. You know, other people within our species that we're not married to or going to create biologically, if we loved them a bit more, that would be good. And if we loved trees a bit more, because not even in our species, that would be good. And that would perhaps be a more, I don't know if it is elitist still, I don't know how to get over that, but it would perhaps be a more profound environmental ethic, a better ethic to base our environmentalism on, a bigger ethic of care and more love in the world. See, that's upbeat. I don't know.
I think one of the things is that difficulties because of the way that work in our society, the amount of well, I suppose a good example in Greece, there were circumstances of when the recession happened. There were like solidarities developing around things like carpool for certain people to get to work, people sharing their transport. And I think that kind of thing is it's a different answer to the kind of let's develop environment friendly transport, more green cars. Because people always, people have to get to work in a way that to earn money to stay alive. And that's the class issue. It's essentially a central class issue. And because the way work's organised, people need transport in the way that they put it to a great degree. Because they're not working in there, it's not like 50 years ago or something where, a lot of people work usually in the communities where people want to the local whatever kind of work place. It's very much more local hobby stuff. People don't have to split up, work in all different places. That in of itself makes the carpooling solutions, the kind of solutions that focus more on like the social relations between people and how they actually use the technologies that are there. That kind of thing makes that more difficult to actually do. That kind of more maybe socialist answer to the problem rather than sort of more capitalist answer of say maybe more capitalist answer of here's a green car that's 30 grand, because like you can afford it anyway. Like, if we're counting on a few people in the world who can afford a green car, 30 grand, to like somehow roll back all this environmental, the increase in environmental devastation. That isn't going to really solve it. And I think the solutions are more. I suppose what I'm saying is to summarise, the solutions are more things like carpooling and that kind of things that people can use, change the way they interact with each other through the technologies that exist, maybe more than the answers, the kind of like, I suppose, micro level technocratic answers, the individualised technocratic answers, green cars, energy saving light bulbs and all of that kind of thing. It's maybe a bit more, the answers are more social, but the way the work is organised makes some of those answers actually harder to implement.
I mean, I actually, absolutely agree with you in a number of ways, and I think a lot of the critique that I've presented today, I've talked about how you open up political space, but when we're talking about the interspecies inequalities and those sorts of things. We talk about environmental justice, some people suffer environmental degradation more than others. Really, that's coming from environmental socialists and eco-Marxists as well. And so there's a big critique from those people about the Anthropocene, and it's the capitalist logic behind that technology, not the technology itself, that they problematize. So, and then if you think about kind of deep green thought, that's often about kind of getting sort of living more simply and doing things locally and sort of reallocations of wealth and not wanting so much or not needing so much. So there's kind of those arguments run concurrently with it as well. So yeah, I do agree with you, and I think that sort of that eco-socialist kind of argument would be, well, if you get rid of the profit, the way we work and labour for profit-making companies, then actually inadvertently, as a byproduct, the environment does better, and we're all happier. So I agree with you. Yeah, so I've just framed. I suppose I've used their arguments and framed slightly differently today.
Well, you, Chris, as the Anthropocene, convinced me, I would say, for blurring individual interests, individual perspectives, and stakeholders involved. We couldn't voice a similar criticism about your take on the Anthropocene, which looked a bit depersonalized to me too. We don't really get an idea about, well, who is pushing that debate forward, reasons. I have three suggestions what is behind this notion and the popularity of the Anthropocene. The first is very simple, buzzword junkies, people who see this as a professional term and jump on the bandwagon. You've all seen them in so many with so many buzzwords, and you recognize some familiar faces there again. Fashions are fashions. The second, or what we need to worry about more, is the climate change community. I think it's no coincidence that this is taking off after the Copenhagen summit and the disappointment where we had this long run-up building up with IPCC reports and Al Gore, and well, take what you will, but there was kind of a huge build up to create pressure for that summit or to bring results, and it didn't happen. And there was kind of a feeling, I think, afterwards, well, what do we say now? Having said everything about the gloomy future we're heading towards, this is kind of not a way to escalate the rhetoric even more, announcing a new geological era, kind of a new gun, rather than you using the guns that didn't work for. Sorry about literalized language, but you get what I'm saying. So there's a need in that community to find a way to escalate rhetoric even more than they have made it. The third is, I think there is a political decision maker community here, because the Anthropocene makes this huge framework, so everything you do in the next 2 or 3 years really doesn't matter. And you can get away with many things if you just embrace this big picture rhetoric that allows day-to-day politics to fly under the radar. So my suggestion is, not really a critique of what you said, but
that's why I like your suggestion, but
beyond the Anthropocene narrative to the vested interests behind it.
I mean, I suppose because I come from a more post-positivist sort of framework, and I look at sort of the trajectories of discourses, I find some reluctance in corporatizing anybody, and that's why I withdrew slightly from that eco-socialist those kind of arguments, because they kind of want to set out a selection of people who are masterminding it, but I think those people might be wrapped up in these discourses and these trends and sort of the norms of being a neoliberal citizen, and actually to sort of pinpoint them as though they, to corporatize them in that way could be problematic. However, I love the idea of buzzword junkies in particular, and I do think that there are trajectories that do promote things like, we'll have the Anthropocene now, and political decision makers are part and parcel of that, and their short-termist thinking, but also the climate change community. Like I said to Eleni there, sustainable development was this buzzword, and in 2012 nobody really turned up to that conference because nobody's bothered by sustainable development anymore, in the sense that it didn't have the buzz that it had sort of when it was launched, and so they've come up with something new to make it, to sort of promote maybe some kind of action, or to make it at least fashionable again. I personally, this is aside from the paper, like the term global weirding, and I think we should all rally around that term, because I think it explains, it kind of encapsulates the unusual weather we experience. Yesterday it was 0 degrees, today it's like 20 degrees or something. And global weirding, I think, has a better political impact, and it makes more sense to the population than the Anthropocene, which is this elitist term. But that's not part of the paper. But I thought your comments, that they're really helpful, and those trajectories are something I should explore in the paper, I think. Yeah. You can't ask a question. Well, you can ask it and then you answer it.
Basically, we can't answer. So it's the reviewer's question, the bastard reviewer, that one. You can answer. Ask the question, why would we want to repoliticize the environment? It's quite an interesting question, because at the end of the day, people are quite stupid. Why devolve it?
And you were asking me that question. The one that we couldn't answer, that we discussed earlier. Okay, I think that the reviewer that's looked at that has conflated politicisation with democratisation. And I think democratisation, in a sense, like getting everybody to vote on whether the environment or climate change is happening or any of these things, just not necessarily good for the environment. And the idea that if you opened it up broadly to democracy as democracy is at the moment, you might not get the outcome that you necessarily are hoping for. It might not be good for the environment. It might be bad. And you might actually want to suspend democracy to save the environment. So I think that's where they're coming from. However, I think what we're talking about when we talk about politicisation is kind of the opening up of different futures. So it's having choices in front of us rather than this over-technological, over-marketised choice, which is the only one we're presented with. So it's sort of about what you've got there to choose from. There isn't enough selection at the moment. We can't envision different socio-ecological futures, or we're not given the space to do so. And that's what, and I think normatively, I do want to do that unashamedly. Open it up to, you know, the Brexiteers or the Remoaners, this decision on whether we should save the environment. I'd be reluctant to do that right now. So those kind of, but then that's a different paper that we can work on another time.
So just a quick addition to that, I suppose the thing is that there are certain democratic channels open to people or citizens in the US, for example, or in Europe, that have been exercised this year. And in a way, you've got sort of, you can really see that dual process that you're talking about, politicization and depoliticization working through that. I mean, the election of Trump, for example, will really not serve to help, not ostensibly, that's what happens, I suppose, but someone that actively sort of buys into and endorses those that say that climate change isn't happening. Now, that's happened anyway, whether it's because people are becoming politicised in a way, and they're using the channels they've got to access, to sort of attack these issues through those channels.
Absolutely, I think it's a really astute point. In a sense, I suppose what she talks about is agonistic politics and antagonistic politics. And when she talks about the post-political condition, what she's saying is the debate has, in not just the environment, but debate generally has been stifled. For years and years, we've had this consensus style of politics where we all go and have this meaningless discussions that nobody gets upset and nobody's got an ideological position. Everybody fundamentally agrees, and it's that kind of stifling of the debate, of sort of agonism, of us talking properly from different political perspectives, that's led, she would argue, to actually more violent forms of division, so what she'd call antagonistic politics. And antagonistic politics sets itself up because everybody's agreeing it and saying yes it is, yes it is. And antagonistic politics, rather than debating it, will go no it isn't. So you might have so what you get is climate change proponents and climate change deniers in this antagonism, rather than debates about how to envision different futures, different socio-ecological futures, which would be more agonism. You get more violent cleavages, and you see that and Pete and I talk about that in a different paper in terms of sort of the migration, anxieties over migration and anti-immigration kind of concerns, so antagonistic forms of politics. And that's because for years you've been told you can't say anything, you can't say anything, you can't say anything, and there's these violent forms of debate then emerge, and they've got material consequences. So yeah, no, I think that's the point that the reviewers should have pointed out, but they didn't. They said, oh, why would you want to repoliticise it anyway? So well done. Yeah. Anthropocened everybody out, I think. Okay.
What is your projection for what will happen in the Anthropocene debate over the next years? Will it stay? Will it flare out?
It's like anything I write a paper on, it just is not fashionable anymore as soon as it gets published, and then it'll just fall by the wayside. I mean, I don't know. It seems to be, at the moment, like there's a journal launched called The Anthropocene, and there's a lot of buzz around it, but it could be very temporary, like a lot of buzzwords. So hopefully, in an individual and selfish way, I kind of hope it doesn't go away because I'm writing on it, but I worry that it will. However, I think the research that I'm doing is more broadly on depoliticisation, repoliticisation, post-politics. So this is just an example of that. And I think that's here. That debate's here for a long while. Yeah.
Much like from other geographers about inventing a term which isn't strictly scientific.
From geographers. Geographers don't mind. Geologists don't like the. Well, no, some geologists like it because they see it as a way to get research funding. So if they say they're doing stuff on the Anthropocene, money comes their way. And others don't like it because they think it waters down it waters down their discipline, because you're not really using proper scientific methods, and they're quite, well, like lots of people would be, they think that that's no good. You can't call it a new geological era when you're in it. That's their main argument. If you're in it, you can't call it. Yeah, so they don't. So they're split. The ones that are money hungry, they like it, and the ones that you know are more dogmatic about the discipline, they don't. Yeah.
Any more questions before we wrap up? Thanks, Emma.
Thank you.